So today we are blessed by having two of our members share their spiritual journey stories with us today. This is one of my favorite services in Unitarian Universalism. You're probably like, really? You don't get to preach much today. That's probably why it's all of our favorite services. But anyway, so I love this service so much because it speaks so well of our faith tradition that members of the congregation, friends, whomever can step up to that pulpit and share their authentic stories, to speak their authentic truth. They don't have to wear a mask. They don't have to profess things that are not in their heart. The only rule I provide people when I extend the invitation is be yourself, speak from your heart. So we're so blessed today to have Jason and Circe sharing. So Jason, would you mind kicking us off?
Not at all.
All right.
Can everyone hear me? Okay, excellent. I feel so tall here. So on a cold December day in 1980, a baby boy was born at UVA Hospital that would change my life forever, mainly because that baby boy was me. My father, mother, and I lived in a house on Elliott Avenue, and when I was about a year old, we moved to a place on Main Street in Scottsville. We welcomed my only sibling, a sister named Emily, in February of 1983, and in November, moved to Fluvanna County, to a house I've always considered my childhood home. Growing up, my parents, along with us kids, attended Rehoboth Mennonite Church in Schuyler. My parents were both from Nelson County, and while they never attended regularly until adulthood, they could both remember attending Bible school in the summers. They knew the church leaders and had even been married in that church in 1979. As a child and as I grew into a young man, I loved the fellowship of the church family there. I really enjoyed singing and learned to sing four-part harmony. It seemed like the natural step that at around 16, I would become baptized and be a full member of the church. It was a small church with Sunday attendance sometimes in the single digits and very few young people, but I thrived in the church, growing in that faith while I was there. As an adolescent, I began to feel different. Something in me was not the same as everyone else. I started to notice that I found other boys attractive, and I acted differently than the other boys that were my cousins and schoolmates. In high school, I learned the word for that was gay. And that wasn't okay. I knew that being gay was a sin. In the 90s, the gay problem started to seem more prevalent, and the churches were worried about an imaginary influx of gay people that would move into the community, take over the churches, and implement their evil agenda in the community. And shame became a constant companion. I listened to sermons that would preach about the evils of homosexuality. I preached sermons denouncing it and spent years trying to pray the gay away. After high school, I studied for a few years at PVCC and eventually was accepted into Messiah College in Grantham, Pennsylvania. There, I was connected with a Mennonite church that some in my home community had ties to, and it was attended by a lot of professors that taught at my school. I even had a girlfriend back home that was attending a school in Virginia. It was here, though, that I began to question many of the ideas and teachings that I had been brought up with. After a lot of prayers on my part, on the part of many that I knew and confided in, I decided that prayer wasn't working. But the real turning point was that when I had to consider that God made me gay, but God hated people being gay, and that punishment was hell, literally. And if I was going to pay the price, there was no point in trying to keep up with the rest of it. And if that wasn't true, what else wasn't? Despite the fact that I was at a Christian college, I was introduced to drinking, drugs, other things, all that only compounded my feelings of shame and unworthiness. I ended up partying, my grades suffered, and I was eventually placed on academic suspension and sent home. I took some classes at PVCC, hoping to eventually go back and finish, until a car accident derailed those plans in 2006. I had extensive injuries. I was airlifted to UVA. I spent a week in the hospital, and I had a long road to recovery. The relationship with my girlfriend ended, and for the next few months I grew angry and bitter. When I was able to, I went back to work and back into the world a different person, not for the better. Over the next several years, I dealt with depression, unemployment, drug and alcohol abuse. During those years, I began to develop my own thoughts about God and spirituality. I utterly rejected them, and over time began to develop what some would call my own theology. I no longer believed in a God that would punish people for making mistakes and being who they were. I embraced atheism, and I found a freedom in that. I was able to see people who didn't fit the perfect mold and accept them for who they were without judgment, but with love and compassion. I started to become a better person. I could look at things happening in the world around me and decide how I would respond through thoughtful dialogue and empathy, not through a lens of worth in a religious bubble. Over time, I began to heal. I began to know myself. I began to accept myself. I made friends that liked me for who I was. They accepted me, warts and all, as they say. And through their encouragement and example is where I learned to accept who I am. I began to come out of the shell that I had been hiding in and thought was protecting me, but was in reality causing me to isolate myself and allow me to wallow in self-pity, shame, and regret. In 2017, I had an encounter with a woman, Robin Fetter, who was a member of this congregation at the time. She encouraged me to come and visit on Sunday. I had had poor experiences in churches and had no desire to jump back into that. I informed her that I was an atheist and politely declined. And to my surprise, she told me that was great and there were a lot of members who felt the same way. What followed were a few weeks of gentle encouragement in finding out exactly what this miraculous place was that would accept a gay atheist into their congregation and not only tolerate him, but encourage, respect, and nourish him. I was at a point in my life where I was seeking that kind of community and engagement. I was even asked to sing in the choir, and I signed the book on July the 15th, 2018, and officially became a member. But my story doesn't end there. Later in the year, I got a job with ABC that required me to work on some Sundays, and as time went on, work and things got in the way, and I fell away for several years. Last year, I left working for ABC, and over the next few months, as I struggled to find regular work again, I began to feel the old feelings of depression and hopelessness starting to creep back in. I'd worked so hard to be the happy and healthy person that I was, and I searched for things to bring me back to that person I had been. Towards the end of September, I decided that I was going to give UU another try. During that time I had been away, there was a change in leadership. The church had changed its name, but from everything I could see, it was the same ideology, the same community where I had found comfort and fellowship for years. Since returning to UU, I have joined the choir, rejoined. I enjoy spending time with these folks on Thursday evenings and on Sunday mornings, singing our hearts out and making a joyful noise. I was able to rejoin that fellowship with like-minded people that I had so missed, being able to be a voice of support for social justice and lifting up those that have been marginalized and disadvantaged. but I wanted to do more. I sent an email to Reverend Tim asking about worship weaving and what was involved in that and how I could be one of them. And he got back to me and hired me after I negotiated twice the normal salary. And it wasn't too long after that that Reverend Leah got in touch with me about being a mentor for a young person in the coming of age program. Once again, I feel active, involved, and like I'm making a difference. Being back at UU has been a thrilling and fulfilling time for me. I appreciate that people have found areas where I can be of service and have the chance to give back to this community. And I really appreciate what Reverend Tim said earlier about while I'm here, whether it's in the pulpit, whether it's in the choir, or whether it's in the congregation with you, I don't have to wear a mask. I don't have to pronounce something that I don't believe in my heart. I can be who I am, and you all can be who you are. And I love you, and I thank you.
I can see a lot more of you from up here. I joined this congregation 11 years ago, but the road it took to get here was pretty convoluted. I've had 4 of what I guess you would call religious experiences in my life. When I was 5, my mother decided to send me to Catholic parochial school where I lasted only 1 semester. I had 2 main takeaways from my experiences as a Catholic. One is that nuns can be truly terrifying, especially when you're 5 years old. The other is what I experienced taking my first communion. I had been taught that that thin wafer was the body of Christ, and I probably took that more literally than I should have. After walking away from the altar, I realized that the wafer had gotten stuck to the roof of my mouth, and I wondered if God would be pissed at me for having Jesus stuck to my palate. When I was very young, I bounced around a lot between relatives, including a stint in the back seat of my dad's brown Dodge. He had come back recently from the South Pacific, where he had witnessed 13 nuclear tests while working for the Atomic Energy Commission. He was a good man, but he was not entirely whole. I went hungry a lot. We slept in the car, on beaches, on the floor of his long-suffering friends' apartments. It all sounds bad, but it was really the best part of my childhood. I never went to school, I rarely bathed, and I didn't learn to read or write until I was 10. The first religious experience happened when I was 11. I had gone back to live with my mother, who had remarried, and my stepfather was a truly awful human being. The abuse was horrific. But we went to church every Sunday. I was suffering through some really awful stuff, and I was mentally slipping away. After a particularly bad blackout, I found myself walking alone down the sidewalk, wondering if I was going to be lost, when something outside of me spoke. It's not that I heard voices, it was just something that was not me talking. It said, if you continue on this path, the pain will stop, but you will lose yourself. If you stay, it will get worse, but before it gets better, but you'll still be in the world. And I answered, I will stay. And it did get worse. By the time the police came to take me away, I was a mess. So I was 13 and my family had abandoned me. I became a ward of the state. In their infinite wisdom, they placed me in a group home run by the Mormon Church. The man who ran this home was an ex-coal miner who dropped out of school at 14, and his favorite form of punishment involved a lot of bruising. We were a collection of thrown-away kids, some abused, others in trouble with the law, some with mental difficulties, and many without families like me. We were expendable. Ned was the person that ran this home. Ned was a devout Mormon who forced us to go to church with him every Sunday, whether we wanted to or not. And I resisted this at first, but eventually gave in and allowed myself to be baptized. I was young and adrift and really had nothing else. Eventually, I went all in. I eagerly adopted the Mormon orthodoxy, including the idea that God was not perfect, but just an evolved being, that I could become a God myself someday, that there were 3 heavens and no hell. I don't know if you've heard this stuff before. The Book of Mormon came from golden plates found in a field and translated by looking through a magic rock. Native Americans were actually the missing 10 tribes of Israel. I think they had to change that one later when genetic testing came around. I was an avid science fiction reader, so all this was great stuff. So different from the stuffy old Catholic Church. By the time I was a senior in high school, they had me teaching a Sunday school class. Concurrent with all of that, though, was my fear that I was an abomination and that God hated me. My gender dysphoria was hitting me hard, especially after I went through puberty. But it was a deep, dark secret that I begged God to fix. At first, I begged to be cured, but as the years went by, I asked God to kill me. I had tried doing the deed myself a couple of times, but it went mostly ignored because kids in state institutions often do this. By the time I was 19, I was beginning to lose my faith. I'd read the Bible and realized that the church was cherry-picking scriptures to fit their narrative. I read the Book of Mormon too and found that it plagiarized directly from the King James Version of the Bible. The final straw was when someone I loved deeply and who had experienced abuse also took her life. I felt bitter and betrayed by the Mormons, and I decided that I would never be part of an organized religion again, although I would remain a Christian. Throughout my 20s, I was on a quest to be normal, which was doomed to fail. I tried traditional psychiatry and moved on to experimental things like Gestalt therapy, transactional analysis, primal scream, EST, actualizations. I don't know if you've heard of any of those. I was living in California at the time, and it was kind of a hotbed of experimental psychology. One of the things I tried was called the Enlightenment Intensive. This is where I had my second religious experience. It was described by some as militant Zen, and it involved asking the same question over and over and over again for 3 days. My question was, who am I? And I ran out of things to say after about 20 minutes. Some people couldn't hack it and left early, but I stuck it out. My science fiction obsession came in handy. I was a mode of energy. I was one of God's brain cells. I was a minor God's fever dream. I think I eventually settled on, I really don't give a crap anymore. I just want out of here. But something happened on the 3rd day that I can't explain. One minute I was bored out of my mind, and the next I was giddy and hysterical. Something changed in me that I have never been the same. I was a lonely, scared child before, but felt I had a connection afterwards, and it's still in me. So I did the only logical thing. I ran away and never came back. My third experience was a couple of years later. I had been reading Carlos Castaneda's books. He wrote about his experiences as a student of a Yaqui Native American from the highlands of Mexico's mountains in the north. His teacher was known as a brujo, which is loosely translated as sorcerer. I was reading Castaneda's 3rd book, Journey to Ixtlan, late one night and laid down to sleep after finishing when I became aware of this fuzzy black ball floating in front of me. Although it was the middle of the night, there was some light coming through the curtains in the street light outside, but this thing in front of me was completely black like a hole, and I felt like I was in danger. Then it faded, and I noticed 2 points of light in the corner of the room, almost like fireflies. And I had another one of those conversations. They said, "Don't do this without a teacher." For the record, I was not on drugs. I know how woo this sounds. It would probably surprise you to hear that I try to bring a degree of critical thinking to my life, but sometimes things just don't fit. I could easily explain it away as lucid dreaming or go to the other extreme and decide that I had an intergalactic message from the cosmic muffin, but I didn't want to do that. So it sits in my memory and probably will never have an explanation. By the way, several years ago, I had the honor of meeting Kate Bornstein. If you don't know who she is, she wrote a book called Gender Outlaws. This oh, somebody else heard of it. This came out long before transgender or transsexual was household words, and it's really groundbreaking. One of the things she told me is that as a trans person, I have access to magic. I don't know what that means. I'm still trying to figure that out. So 11 years ago, I happened to come to a service here for no particular reason. I hadn't been in a church for decades. Back then, the opening message before the service started with something like, wherever you are, whatever you believe, whomever you love, or how you identify, all are welcome here. I went to the newcomers orientation after service, but little did they know they had me at however you identify. I signed the book a week later, and I broke the vow that I made at 19 to never be part of a church again. I'd finally found a space with weirdos like me. And this has been my spiritual home ever since. I'll close by telling you about my fourth experience, which happened just 5 months ago while waking up from spinal surgery. It was a complex procedure that lasted 6 hours. My dear friend was waiting in the recovery room when I opened my eyes and said, Karen, I saw the light, but I decided to come back. She told me about this a couple of days later and asked me what I meant. I think my jaw hit the floor because I have no memory of ever saying that. Like, what light? What does decide to come back mean? Was there some uncertainty about that? Anyway, I'll have to add that to one of those things that doesn't fit into any of my boxes. Thank you.
So after the speakers finish, I always turn to the congregation and go, see what I mean? Right? I mean, wow, thank you so much, Jason and Cersei, for your honesty, for your authenticity, for your courage in just being up here and sharing your stories. They were powerful and compelling, and I don't remember offering you double the salary for being a worship weaver, but we might have to revisit that. I don't know. So anyway, and Cersei, I always make this joke too, probably not a very good joke, but you didn't really break your vow about staying away from organized religion. We're a somewhat disorganized religion, so it's all good. So, but again, this right here, what we experienced right now, this is Unitarian Universalism at its absolute best, where you can be yourself, you can come into this space, and you can stand up here and speak your truth. And you're not going to be judged, you're not going to be mocked, you're not going to be hated, you're just going to be loved. You know, every time our young people, the coming of age kids are thinking about youth, are thinking about, do I want to stand up and share my little credo statement or my beliefs? And I always tell them, I said, well, that of course is your choice. But remember, these are your people. This is your community. They are going to clap for you and hug you and love you, no matter what you get up and say. These are your people. And I hope each and every one of you knows that and feels that way as well. We love you, like Jason said, and we are your people. This is, I hope, will always be your spiritual home.